Mountain. "Shouldn't we go back to Piggy?" said Maurice. "Before dark?" The twins nodded like one boy. "Yes, that's right. Let's go up there in the morning." Ralph looked out and saw the sea. "We've got to start the fire again." "You haven't got Piggy's specs," said Jack, "so you can't." "Then we'll find out if the mountain's clear." Maurice spoke, hesitating, not wanting to seem a funk. "Supposing the beast's up there?" Jack brandished his spear. "We'll kill it." The sun seemed a little cooler. He slashed with the spear. "What are we waiting for?" "I suppose," said Ralph, "if we keep on by the sea this way, we'll come out below the burnt bit, and then we can climb the mountain." Once more, Jack led them along by the suck and heave of the blinding sea. Once more Ralph dreamed, letting his skillful feet deal with the difficulties of the path. Yet here his feet seemed less skillful than before. For most of the way they were forced right down to the bare rock by the water, and had to edge along between that and the dark luxuriance of the forest. There were little cliffs to be scaled, some to be used as paths, lengthy traverses where one used hands as well as feet. Here and there they could clamber over wave-wet rock, leaping across clear pools that the tide had left. They came to a gully that split the narrow foreshore like a defense. This seemed to have no bottom, and they peered awe-stricken into the gloomy crack where the water gurgled. Then the wave came back, the gully boiled before them, and spray dashed up to the very creepers so that the boys were wet and shrieking. They tried the forest, but it was thick and woven like a bird's nest. In the end, they had to jump one by one, waiting till the water sank, and even so, some of them got a second drenching. After that the rocks seemed to be growing impassable, so they sat for a time, letting their rags dry and watching the clipped outlines of the rollers that moved so slowly past the island. They found fruit in a haunt of bright little birds that hovered like insects. Then Ralph said they were going too slowly. He himself climbed a tree and parted the canopy, and saw the square head of the mountain seeming still a great way off. Then they tried to hurry along the rocks, and Robert cut his knee quite badly, and they had to recognize that this path must be taken slowly if they were to be safe. So they proceeded after that as if they were climbing a dangerous mountain, until the rocks became an uncompromising cliff, overhung with impossible jungle, and falling sheer into the sea. Ralph looked at the sun critically. Early evening, after tea time at any rate. "I don't remember this cliff," said Jack, crestfallen. "So this must be the bit of the coast I missed." Ralph nodded. "Let me think." By now Ralph had no self-consciousness in public thinking that would treat the decisions as though he were playing chess. The only trouble was that he would never be a very good chess player. He thought of the little uns and Piggy. Vividly he imagined Piggy by himself, huddled in a shelter that was silent except for the sounds of nightmare. "We can't leave the little uns alone with Piggy. Not all night." The other boys said nothing but stood round, watching him. "If we went back we should take hours." Jack cleared his throat and spoke in a queer, tight voice. "We mustn't let anything happen to Piggy, must we?" Ralph tapped his teeth with the dirty point of Eric's spear. "If we go across," he glanced round him. "Someone's got to go across the island and tell Piggy we'll be back after dark." Bill spoke, unbelieving. "Through the forest by himself? Now?" "We can't spare more than one." Simon pushed his way to Ralph's elbow. "I'll go if you like. I don't mind, honestly." Before Ralph had time to reply, he smiled quickly, turned, and climbed into the forest. Ralph looked back at Jack, seeing him, infuriatingly for the first time. "Jack, that time you went the whole way to the Castle Rock," Jack glowered. "Yes." "You came along part of the shore, below the mountain, beyond there." "Yes." "And then?" "I found a pig run. It went for miles." "So the pig run must be somewhere in there." Ralph nodded. He pointed at the forest. Everybody agreed sagely. "All right, then. We'll smash a way through till we find the pig run." He took a step and halted. "Wait a minute, though. Where does the pig run go to?" "The mountain," said Jack. "I told you." He sneered. "Don't you want to go to the mountain?" Ralph sighed, sensing the rising antagonism, understanding that this was how Jack felt as soon as he ceased to lead. "I was thinking of the light. We'll be stumbling about." "We were going to look for the beast." "There won't be enough light." "I don't mind going," said Jack hotly. "I'll go when we get there. Won't you? Would you rather go back to the shelters and tell Piggy?" Now it was Ralph's turn to flush, but he spoke despairingly, out of the new understanding that Piggy had given him. "Why do you hate me?" The boys stirred uneasily, as though something indecent had been said. The silence lengthened. Ralph, still hot and hurt, turned away first. Come on. He led the way and set himself as by right to hack at the tangles. Jack brought up the rear, displaced and brooding. The pig track was a dark tunnel, for the sun was sliding quickly toward the edge of the world, and in the forest shadows were never far to seek. The track was broad and beaten, and they rang along at a swift trot. Then the roof of leaves broke up, and they halted, breathing quickly, looking at the few stars that pricked round the head of the mountain. There you are. The boys peered at each other doubtfully. Ralph made a decision. We'll go straight across to the platform and climb tomorrow. They murmured agreement, but Jack was standing by his shoulder. If you're frightened, of course. Ralph turned on him. Who went first on the castle rock? I went too, and that was daylight. All right. Who wants to climb the mountain now? Silence was the only answer. Sam and Eric, what about you? We ought to go and tell Piggy. Yes, tell Piggy that. But Simon went. We ought to tell Piggy in case. Robert, Bill. They were going straight back to the platform now. Not, of course, that they were afraid, but tired. Ralph turned back to Jack. You see, I'm going up the mountain. The words came from Jack viciously, as though they were a curse. He looked at Ralph, his thin body tensed, his spear held, as if he threatened him. I'm going up the mountain to look for the beast. Now. Then, the supreme sting, the casual, bitter word. Coming? At that word, the other boys forgot their urge to be gone and turned back to sample the fresh rub of two spirits in the dark. The word was too good, too bitter, too successfully daunting to be repeated. It took Ralph at low water when his nerve was relaxed for the return to shelter, and the still, friendly waters of the lagoon. I don't mind. Astonished, he heard his voice come out, cool and casual, so that the bitterness of Jack's taunt fell powerless. If you don't mind, of course. Oh, not at all. Jack took a step. Well then. Side by side, watched by silent boys, the two started up the mountain. Ralph stopped. We're silly. Why should only two go? If we find anything, two won't be enough. There came the sound of the boys scuttling away. Astonishingly, a dark figure moved against the tide. Roger? Yes. That's three then. Once more they set out to climb the slope of the mountain. The darkness seemed to flow around them like a tide. Jack, who had said nothing, began to choke and cough, and a gust of wind set all three spluttering. Ralph's eyes were blinded with tears. Ashes were on the edge of the burnt patch. Their footsteps and the occasional breeze were stirring up small devils of dust. Now that they stopped again, Ralph had time while he coughed to remember how silly they were. If there was no beast, and almost certainly there was no beast, in that case, well and good. But if there was something waiting on top of the mountain, what was the use of three of them, handicapped by darkness and carrying only sticks? We're being fools. Out of the darkness came the answer. Windy? Irritably, Ralph shook himself. This was all Jack's fault. Course I am, but we're still being fools. If you don't want to go, said the voice sarcastically, I'll go up by myself. Ralph heard the mockery and hated Jack. The sting of ashes in his eyes, tiredness, fear, enraged him. Go on then! We'll wait here. There was silence. Why don't you go? Are you frightened? A stain in the darkness, a stain that was Jack, detached itself and began to draw away. All right, so long. The stain vanished. Another took its place. Ralph felt his knee against something hard and rocked a charred trunk that was edgy to the touch. He felt the sharp cinders that had been bark push against the back of his knee and knew that Roger had sat down. He felt with his hands and lowered himself beside Roger while the trunk rocked among invisible ashes. Roger, uncommunicative by nature, said nothing. He offered no opinion on the beast nor told Ralph why he had chosen to come on this mad expedition. He simply sat and rocked the trunk gently. Ralph noticed a rapid and infuriating tapping noise and realized that Roger was banging his silly wooden stick against something. So they sat, the rocking, tapping, impervious Roger and Ralph, fuming. Round them, the close sky was loaded with stars, save where the mountain punched up a hole of blackness. There was a slithering noise high above them, the sound of someone taking giant and dangerous strides on rock or ash. Then Jack found them, and was shivering and croaking in a voice they could just recognize as his. I saw a thing on top. They heard him blunder against the trunk, which rocked violently. He lay silent for a moment, then muttered, "Keep a good lookout. It may be following." A shower of ash pattered round them. Jack sat up. "I saw a thing bulge on the mountain." "You only imagined it," said Ralph shakily, "because nothing would bulge, not any sort of creature." Roger spoke. They jumped, for they had forgotten him. "A frog?" Jack giggled and shuddered. "Some frog! There was a noise, too, a kind of plop noise. Then the thing bulged." Ralph surprised himself, not so much by the quality of his voice, which was even, but by the bravado of his intention. "We'll go and look." For the first time since he had first known Jack, Ralph could feel him hesitate. "Now?" His voice spoke for him. "Of course!" He got off the trunk and led the way across the clinking cinders up into the dark, and the others followed. Now that his physical voice was silent, the inner voice of reason, and other voices too, made themselves heard. Piggy was calling him a kid. Another voice told him not to be a fool, and the darkness and desperate enterprise gave the night a kind of dentist's chair unreality. As they came to the last slope, Jack and Roger drew near, changed from the ink stains to distinguishable figures. By common consent, they stopped and crouched together. Behind them on the horizon was a patch of lighter sky where in a moment the moon would rise. The wind roared once in the forest and pushed their rags against them. Ralph stirred. "Come on." They crept forward, Roger lagging a little. Jack and Ralph turned the shoulder of the mountain together. The glittering lengths of the lagoon lay below them, and beyond that a long white smudge that was the reef. Roger joined them. Jack whispered, "Let's creep forward on hands and knees. Maybe it's asleep." Roger and Ralph moved on, this time leaving Jack in the rear for all his brave words. They came to the flat top where the rock was hard to hands and knees. A creature that bulged. Ralph put his hand in the cold, soft ashes of the fire and smothered a cry. His hand and shoulder were twitching from the unlooked-for contact. Green lights of nausea appeared for a moment and ate into the darkness. Roger lay behind him and Jack's mouth was at his ear. "Over there, where there used to be a gap in the rock, a sort of hump. See?" Ashes blew into Ralph's face from the dead fire. He could not see the gap or anything else, because the green lights were opening again and growing, and the top of the mountain was sliding sideways. Once more, from a distance, he heard Jack's whisper, "Scared?" Not scared so much as paralyzed, hung up there immovable on the top of a diminishing, moving mountain. Jack slid away from him. Roger bumped, fumbled with a hiss of breath, and passed onwards. He heard them whispering. "Can you see anything?" There, in front of them, only 3 or 4 yards away, was a rock-like hump where no rock should be. Ralph could hear a tiny chattering noise coming from somewhere, perhaps from his own mouth. He bound himself together with his will, fused his fear and loathing into a hatred, and stood up. He took 2 leaden steps forward. Behind them, the silver moon had drawn clear the horizon. Before them, something like a great ape was sitting asleep with its head between its knees. Then the wind roared in the forest. There was confusion in the darkness, and the creature lifted its head, holding toward them the ruin of a face. Ralph found himself taking giant strides among the ashes, heard other creatures crying out and leaping, and dared the impossible on the dark slope. Presently the mountain was deserted, save for the 3 abandoned sticks and the thing that bowed. Hope you enjoyed the end of Chapter 7. We'll continue next week. Please make sure that you've annotated in your book. If you didn't while you were reading, go back now. Remember, it's underlining and marking in the margin. Any signposts? Then you should mark those as well. Have a great rest of the weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.